Hello everyone, Ororon is the new 4-star character releasing in Genshin patch 5.2. He's a very simple character to play and understand, but he elevates a team niche that hasn't had much focus for a long time, making him a very impactful 4-star character to the overall meta. Although Ororon hasn't changed too much throughout his beta, I wanted to sum up all of the updated information you need to know about him into one final guide. I will be explaining how Ororon works, the best ways to build him, his potential best teams, and analyzing his place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Pretty much everything you need to know with simple and practical explanations while also giving more detailed analysis that is backed by TC. Ororon is a 4-star electro bow character that ascends with attack percent. Just like other natlan characters, he plays around the Night Soul mechanic, though he doesn't have as much exploration movement as the others. He is an off-field sub-DPS who plays around the electro-charged reaction. Ororon brings both off-field damage and buffs to these electro-charged teams, strengthening this niche and allowing for new meta team archetypes for existing characters. Thus, Ororon can be seen as the electro-charged version of Chevreuse combined with the off-field capabilities of Fischl. His main active abilities are very simple. His elemental skill shoots out an orb to deal damage to an enemy. If there are additional enemies nearby, the orb can bounce to up to 3 different enemies, dealing additional damage. This can only bounce to a single enemy once. After 3 bounces, or if there are no eligible bounce targets, the orb disappears. Lastly, the skill generates 3 electro particles. Ororon's elemental burst has a 15-second cooldown and 60 energy cost. It deals AoE electro damage and places a supersonic oculus on the field that lasts for 9 seconds. This taunts enemies and shoots out 3 supersonic waves that constantly rotates to deal damage to enemies. It's basically a stationary Shangling Pyronado. Ororon's passive ability, specifically his A1, makes up the core part of his kit. After using his elemental skill, Ororon can gain Night Soul points whenever a Hydro or Electro teammate hits an enemy. He can gain a maximum of 50 Night Soul points every skill usage through this way. Also, triggering Night Soul Burst gives Ororon an additional 40 Night Soul points, but he can only hold up to 80 points. Ororon can use these Night Soul points to deal additional damage while off-field. Whenever an enemy takes damage from the electro-charged reaction or a party member other than Ororon deals Night Soul aligned damage, Ororon consumes 10 Night Soul points to enter Night Soul's Blessing and deals damage equal to 160% of his attack to up to 4 nearby enemies. His A1 can be triggered every 1.8 seconds and has no elemental ICD. This is Ororon's main source of damage alongside his elemental burst. With Ororon's A4 passive, after he uses his skill, when the on-field character hits an enemy with a normal charged or plunging attack, that character gets 3 energy, and this can trigger 3 times, so a total of 9 energy. If Ororon is off-field, he gets that 9 energy as well, so a nice supportive passive that helps ease ER requirements. Lastly, Ororon's special exploration passives give the team increased gliding speed and allows him to leap into the air and fly around a bit. While in the air, he can aim with his bow and interact with special entities in natlan. That's everything on Ororon's base kit. Other than his A1, his main source of damage is his burst, so prioritize leveling that talent first. His skill deals good damage in AoE, but in single target it doesn't do much, so you can prioritize it second. Ororon is a simple character to play as a support and sub DPS on the team. All you do on him is use skill, then his burst, then swap out to your other characters. Very simple and easy to play. Next, let's go over Ororon's Constellations. C1 gives Ororon's skill 2 additional bounces, good for fighting more than 3 enemies but irrelevant otherwise. In addition, enemies that take damage from his skill will take 50% increased damage from his A1 procs. C2 gives Ororon up to 32% electro damage bonus after using his burst to hit enemies. Although it can't buff all of his damage since it needs time to stack, the extra damage bonus is nice nevertheless. C3 increases his burst talent level by 3, C4 refunds Ororon 8 energy after using his burst. It also makes his burst rotate faster, increasing its hit count onto enemies. C5 increases his skill talent level by 3, and lastly C6 allows Ororon to buff the active character with up to 30% attack after triggering his A1 passive multiple times. In addition, using Ororon's burst will trigger one stronger instance of his A1, a very solid C6 that increases Ororon's buffing capabilities. Overall, Ororon is not constellation dependent at all, as C0 Ororon works perfectly fine for any team. But if you do get any of his constellations, it will buff the damage he provides to a team. Thus, pulling extra copies of him to boost his performance is valuable, but it is by no means necessary. Next, let's go over Ororon's best build options. For 5-star weapons, the first Great Magic, Polar Star, Aqua Simulacra, and Skyward Harp are all great stat sticks to increase his personal damage. Elegy is also a very good support option with its team buffs and ER substat helping to meet Ororon's ER requirements. For 4-star weapons, Viridescent Hunt and Alley Hunter are both solid damage options. For free-to-play weapons, the natlan craftable is the best one for Ororon. Even though you won't fully stack its special passive, it still gives some attack percent, which is nice. Lastly, Favonius Bow is surprisingly not a good option for Ororon. Even though it does help meet his ER requirements, using this weapon tanks his damage a lot, and it will be much better for him to focus on a damage weapon and use an ER Hourglass instead to meet those ER requirements. For artifacts, since Ororon is a natlan off-field sub-DPS, he can take full advantage of 4-piece scroll to give damage bonus to his team. This is the only artifact set you should use. For artifact stats, attack or energy recharge hourglass, electro damage goblet, crit circlet. For sub-stats, prioritize energy recharge until you have enough, then crit, then attack, and lastly EM. Since electro-charged ownership is inconsistent, EM is low priority. For Ororon's energy requirements, double electro Ororon will be about 110 to 120 ER, while solo electro will be about 150 to 180 ER depending on the number of Favonius users you have on the team. Finally, let's cover Ororon's best team comps. In order to fully utilize Ororon's off-field capabilities, he needs to enter Night Soul's Blessing to activate 4-piece scroll's full team damage buff. For this to happen, he needs to constantly trigger his A1 passive, which requires attacks from Hydro and Electro teammates to gain Night Soul points and electro-charged damage or Night Soul damage to spend those Night Soul points. Thus, in most cases, triggering the electro-charged reaction will be the core part of Ororon's best teams, and since Ororon's skill and burst can't have full off-field uptime, a second source of electro damage from the team will be needed to maintain electro-charged reactions to trigger Ororon's A1. Ororon has 3 main team archetypes. First, full electro-charged teams. In the standard 4-star Sucrose Taser team, you can replace either Official or Beta with Ororon for more buffs to the team. You can also play Ororon in a electro-charged team centered around an on-field electro DPS like Cloran, or an on-field Hydro DPS like Ayato or Child. In these teams, a full EM Anemo support like Kazuha gets a lot of value. Not only is he providing CC and damage buffs to the team, but with so much EM, his own Hydro and Electro swirls will deal a lot of damage, and those swirls can further trigger more electro charges, propagating chain reactions. And this damage is only getting increased with the electro-charged reaction getting buffed in patch 5.2. Ororon's second main team archetype is double electro hyper bloom. These teams are very similar to the electro-charged ones, but they replace the Anemo support with a Dendro off-fielder like Nahida. This team option looks specifically promising for Cyno, as with Ororon's A1 passive, he doesn't need to refresh off-field electro uptime like Fischl does, allowing you to stay on Cyno during his burst. Ororon's third main team archetype is Chaska teams. Not only does Ororon deal decent personal damage, but he's also able to buff Pyro, Hydro, Electro, and Cryo damage with 4-piece scroll if he's able to trigger the corresponding reactions related to those elements himself. And since Chaska's bullet conversion mechanic will make her attacks any of these elements based on her team composition, she greatly appreciates Ororon's buffs. On top of that, since Chaska is a natlan character, she deals Night Soul damage, so she can help trigger Ororon's A1 coordinated attacks without relying on just electro-charged. To conclude this Ororon guide, I wanted to share my analysis on his place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Ororon looks to be a very strong 4-star character that elevates the electro-charged niche specifically. In these teams, not only does he have decent off-field AoE personal damage, but most importantly, he's also able to provide buffs by holding 4-piece scroll, which is a great upgrade for the teams that can fully utilize it. Because of this, Ororon for electro-charged teams is going to be similar to what Chevreuse did for overload teams, and this is great for making electro-charged teams a stronger meta option you can play. For example, Cloran's current best teams are Chevreuse Overload, Hyperbloom, and Aggravate. Electro-charged teams with Cloran work, but it wasn't considered as good as her other team options. But with the introduction of Ororon, Cloran's electro-charged team is now looking more competitive with her other team options. In Ororon's electro-charged teams, he is typically replacing Fischl, who are very analogous with each other as they both rely on passive talents for their off-field presence. And although Fischl is a better unit overall, in electro-charged teams specifically, Ororon still does similar damage and can provide some energy. But he is significantly better in AoE, and most importantly, he provides damage bonus with 4-piece scroll. Thus, Ororon is a Fischl alternative or upgrade in electro-charged teams, which speaks to Ororon's strength as a character. Lastly, because Ororon's A1 passive can also be triggered by Night Soul aligned damage, the release of future natlan characters will likely allow Ororon to shine even in non-electro-charged teams. One likely example is the release of Pyro and Electro natlan characters like Mawika and Iansan. If they happen to be main DPSs, then both Ororon and Chevreuse can buff them in an overload team. If they happen to be off-field DPSs or supports, then all these characters can work with existing main DPSs that are already strong in Chevreuse overload teams, making them even stronger. Thus, even if you don't want Chaska, if you don't have High Pity built already, you might want to consider pulling on her banner just to see if you can pick up one copy of Ororon. And that's everything I wanted to cover about Ororon. I hope this guide and analysis was helpful to you all in giving you a better understanding of everything related to Ororon. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the video and want to see more guides like this on future characters. Also, I have a small Discord server, so if you just want to discuss about Genshin or other gacha games, ask any questions, or just chill, feel free to join. For all of you planning on wishing, I wish you all the best of luck on your Ororon pools.